and you're going bye-bye. Well, with that type of tough approach, with not mixing any words, with a tough prosecutor who has sent kids away if they fall out of the diversion program, they have saved Colorado Springs in the first year of their existence $800,000 in court costs. They have kept delinquency down. Why don't we have that type of program in communities across the United States? I'm for programs that will save kids, but also save taxpayers money. Because after working 3 years on my book, I have become a fiscal conservative, and to me, Ronald Reagan wants to spend all of our money. I'm sick. I am sick of seeing public monies being wasted, being there to subsidize a political system and pension funds. I'm just sick of it. I'm sick of the argument of people saying, well, what about the jobs of those people? Well, hell with their jobs. When my father-in-law was laid off from the railroad company, when he was only 5 years from retirement, the government didn't say, what about his job? I mean, we have in business, you have to go and find new work. Business doesn't guarantee full employment for life. Why should the state? And especially at the expense of children. There are good programs in this country. They're 2/3 cheaper to run. They're about 80% more successful. Why don't we have them? Why don't we have programs like in Nashville, Tennessee, where instead of dumping infants in the county detention facility, with a little money and a little vision, they're now dumping them, quote unquote, with loving, caring people that will take that infant for a week or a month or forever, and not place them in a county jail. Why don't we have more programs like in California, Sacramento County, where up until a few years ago that was a human pit. And then there was an experiment. Some reform type people went to the county commissioners and said, why don't you let us try it a new way? 4 days out of a given week, let us try our way, which is a kid gets busted for runaway or something like that. Let us give family counseling. Let us involve the whole family and not have therapy in a vacuum. They said, fine. The other 3 days during the week, do it your old way. Let the police pick them up, bust them, put them in the detention facility for 14 days, Thorazine them, do the whole trip. And then after 7 months, let's compare the results. That's fair. And they did. The results were amazing. Less kids were locked up, a higher success rate, and the savings of taxpayers' dollars. Sacramento County is a model of the type of detention that we should have in this country. It's a humane model and a model that saves taxpayers' dollars. Why don't we have that in my state of Pennsylvania? Why don't we have it around the country? Well, my biased view is that it is too threatening to the political system, too threatening to jobs.
Question here. Would you stand so people could hear your question?
The only comprehensive set of statistics that I've seen in this area is a California pilot project. And what those statistics seem to suggest is, number one, it was a lot more expensive because the county, when you see all that money coming from the state, everyone wants to make their own county detention facility, number one. Number two, the actual number of detentions went up because the probation and parole officers, juvenile probation and parole officers involved are a lot more willing to throw kids in detention for up to a week on a county basis rather than return them to the institution. And thirdly, and those returns where were returned to the institution, the average length of return went up considerably. And so I'd have to say that both in terms of financial and in terms of incarceration, that California project you're talking about, was not too successful, at least in terms of the statistics that I saw.
That's the Sacramento program?
The original California pilot project for community corrections, the one that was
Well, if we're talking about the same one, then your material is different than my material. I spent a lot of time out there. I went through financial records. I just didn't listen to the PR people. But I'm not surprised if, in fact, it is maybe a little more expensive over the long run. For example, in my state of Pennsylvania, it is getting increasingly expensive to have a community-based program. Not because the community-based program is so expensive, but when you combine the pennies they give for community-based programs to the budget for Department of Corrections, you have an incredible inflated budget. In my state of Pennsylvania, we put out $50 million to youth corrections at the state level, and 2 years ago we had an amazing amount of $200,000 for community-based programs. Now that we're trying to get more money into community-based programs, and nothing, literally nothing is happening to the budget for the Department of Corrections. If anything, that goes up with inflation and pension funds and all that. We're hearing a big cry, not against corrections, not against the reform schools. We're hearing the cry against community-based programs because they're expensive, and PR people for the other side will inflate the total cost of incarceration by including that budget. If we are to have meaningful change in this country, and I say this as someone from the political world, someone who spent 16 years in politics at all levels, from an elected committee person to working on the Hill in Washington, D.C. for a senator and a congressman, who ran political campaigns at the local level to the federal level, I'm going to say what we need to do is simply divert existing monies from budget line items, from Department of Corrections to community-based social programs. Pure and simple. If that was done in California, I question if that program would be that expensive, if it was done throughout the country. But that little measure, that little budget item, will be like the Battle of Stalingrad because of the vested self-interest within that area. There are some reformers that are saying to me around the country, you're crazy to fight that fight because you won't win. The thing to do is guarantee their jobs, come up with new monies, and just let them wither on the vine. I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to that as a taxpayer. I don't subscribe to that as a political strategy. I think if the public is made aware of the amount of money that goes into a system with a long history of failure, a system that commingles criminal and non-criminal children together, a system that is so tied into the county political organizations, I don't think the public will tolerate it. And that gets me into just something I'd like to talk about for a second, called the National Coalition for Children's Justice. That's an organization that came about as a result of the book that I wrote, and as a result of the generosity, and I may add the courage, of the Lilly Endowment. As you may know, the Lilly Endowment comes from pharmaceutical money. And after they read my book, they then decided to fund the National Coalition for Children's Justice. And the purpose of this organization is to mobilize public support and political clout. The public support is through mass media. 60 Minutes, Today Show, all the major networks are greatly interested in this area now from the standpoint of taxes, from the standpoint of law and order. And I assure you there will be more and more and more and more national media attention to this. The other part, political power. I've successfully convinced the AFL-CIO, the United Mine Workers, United Auto Workers, and other labor unions that it is their children that are being messed over by an outdated, destructive system. Their children, the workers of American labor, unemployed and employed. I have successfully convinced the Gray Panthers and other senior citizens that what happens to children is the same thing happening to children, to women and senior citizens in nursing homes. The same thing. I have successfully convinced a friend, Ralph Nader, to get into human consumerism. And last week we started that when in Princeton, New Jersey, a staff that I put together conducted training sessions all day for the weekend with Nader Raiders representing every college and university from New York State. The training consisted of going into a facility, not for the tour and tea, but going into a facility without having the BS trip, without having the tea, and seeing what's happening and providing some accountability. The National Association of Certified Public Accountants for the Public Interest has also taken this issue on and will work within the coalition. We have at our disposal certified public accountants throughout the country who will work overtime for the public interest, who will explain the vouchers that are coming to us, the budgets, the audits, the Form 990s. We also have a fellow on our board called Bob Leonard. Bob Leonard is the president-elect of the National Association of District Attorneys. He started the original diversion program in Flint, Michigan. He's going after white-collar crime in Flint, Michigan. He has pledged, based upon the evidence that we produce, the financial data, the other materials, that prosecutors in this country will now take a look at what's happening to children and the people that have the responsibility by law to care for those children. So the National Coalition for Children's Justice will not just be some PR or some do-good group, but we're going to go and make the letter of the law and extend the letter of the law to include children.
Question here?
I think that nationally, I've heard a couple of criticisms of your presentations, which I'd like to have you respond to. And I recognize that, taking the other side does not sell newspapers or make TV shows or get you hired for speeches. But one of them is that you seem to make no differentiation between the private for-profit and the private non-profit sector. And the other one is that you don't seem to, and I think you've done this more in your question and answer period here, you don't seem to particularly come with the positive things that are being done. Would you care to respond to either or both of those?
Sure, the positive things that are being done. I don't think that's fair criticism because, one, I think in order to look at a problem, you have to recognize the problem and dissect the problem and see if in fact it is a problem. You can't be treated for cancer unless you have cancer, where someone takes a look at the cancer, and it's not nice to look at cancer and to be explained that you have cancer, etc., etc. In my book, I did a chapter on successful alternatives, a chapter that dealt with alternatives at every level, from infants being locked up to 5-time felons. I'm serving on the board of trustees of the Villages in Topeka, Kansas with Dr. Carl Menninger, and on every program that I have been on to date, I do explain good programming. I do explain a concept like the Villages, where it is inexpensive to house children in a humane, loving setting. I am helping Dr. Carl Menninger spread that gospel and that type of program to every state in the union. I am personally inviting and will participate in a group of people going to Topeka, Kansas. That group of people will be 2 members of each state legislature from the United States, especially powerful members of each state legislature, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, president of the Senate, etc., etc. They will go to Topeka, Kansas. They're going to see a good program. They're going to see a positive program. I'm not taking them down to Texas where kids were gassed. I'm not taking them to the private facilities across this country where the horror stories abound. I'm taking them to see a very good program that's inexpensive, that's humane, but I'm also not going to trust their judgment alone. The press back home will know of that visitation, of that junket, if you will. The press back home will be given evidence as to the cost of locking up children in public facilities compared to getting into that type of program. And the reason I'm doing that is because I would like to see that type of program, because working with 60 Minutes, we came across some incredible data that to me is very frightening. The data that we came across was that under the domain and power of state departments of public welfare in this country, there are 750,000 children dependent and neglected under the guardianship and power of the state. There are another 500,000 mentally retarded children coming under the domain and power of state departments of mental health, mental retardation. We don't need that type of thing. We need some do away with IQ testing, and most of them would be free. And another 500,000 and growing educationally handicapped children coming under the state departments of public education. So we're talking close to 2 million kids, in my opinion, that will be subject to shipment around the country. Now, I do not make a difference between those that are in business for profit and those that are in business for nonprofit. That may be a valid criticism, but probably the reason why I don't make a difference is because it's my basic feeling, my gut reaction, my judgment after 3 years of work that they're all in it for the same reason. They're in it for profit. Why is it in New York City that a group of nonprofit organizations teamed up in incredible wealth and lobby to protect that wealth? Why is it nonprofit organizations will not make public their Form 990? Why shouldn't that be open to the public? I'll make a statement right now and say that I will no longer group the two together if those that would like not to be grouped together will share their 990 with the National Coalition for Children's Justice. The Form 990 is a form that shows your stock portfolio, that shows your financial assets. That's the form of a nonprofit organization that was made public in Omaha, Nebraska, called Boys Town. That's an organization that my wife and I sent $3 and $4 to every Christmas, not to build up a $248 million stock portfolio, but to help children directly.
It has been a long time. Our speaker has been on his feet for more than an hour. I am going to suggest, and I'm sorry I'm going to cut you off, luncheon is going to be served in about 15 minutes. I would suggest that if there are further questions, that you come to the front now and let our speaker sit. Also, a small commercial. The book, Weeping in the Playtime of Others, is a worthy book.
Could I, I'm sorry, just jump in. One thing. Some people are saying, you know, the selling a book. I want to make something clear. McGraw-Hill gets 87.5% profit of a book. I didn't write a book to add to the wealth of McGraw-Hill. Speaking fees, the largest amount of money that came to support my research came from a very small foundation, the Kenneth and Martha Wooden Savings Fund for their children. I put $20,000 of my own money into research, into this book, which will never be recaptured. I put that money gladly into that research and that book because I feel deeply that I was fortunate, that I was lucky, that my children now enjoy a good education and can travel. But I can never forget where I came from. I can never forget the kids that I grew up with and where they now are. So I'm committed to help my roots. And I'll take criticism, but sometimes I have a problem taking criticism from people that have never missed a paycheck, that have never put their own money directly on the line. And if I may quote from an Indian, Chief Justice, or Chief Joseph, when he said, "Good words do not give me back my children. Good words will not give me my children good health and stop them from dying. Good words will not get my people a home where they can live in peace and take care of themselves. I'm tired of talk that comes to nothing. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and all the broken promises. I'm Irish, and I'm going to fight like hell to make sure good words will be made, not broken promises, but a reality. And if there are people that are offended by that fight, if there are people that are offended by what I write about or what I say, come forward and let's have a public dialogue, and that public dialogue will clear the air, I hope, because what we're really talking about are not turf buildings or empires or organizations or anything of that nature. We're talking about treating children in a humane way. And if it's any reassurance, I don't plan to be around for the rest of my life working on this issue. I have a self-destruct mission. After 3 years, I plan to leave this, but I plan to make some change. And after 3 years, I'm going to become one of the best playwrights in America. I thank you.